Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of February of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, let's once again talk about Ukraine resources and let's summarize everything. Currently, when summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that there are three customers, three buyers, three countries, three different regions in the world that are willing to purchase Ukraine resources, that are willing to take everything under their control. So the first customer, the first buyer is the United States of America. So several days ago, they sent the US representative with the purpose to discuss the agreement with Zelensky, and but the United States of America was trying to trick Zelensky by taking everything under complete control. And the main purpose and the main value that the US were planning to pay to the Ukrainians is some security guarantees. But this very interesting security guarantees that the United States of America were planning to provide Ukrainians. Let's discuss in details. According to US plan, the US were planning to take under control up to 50% of Ukraine resources. Later, several lawyers probably reported when they analyzed the agreement that US offered Zelensky to sign a document giving the US rights to 50% of Ukraine's future minerals resources, but Zelensky refused. In exchange, the United States of America were promising Zelensky that they will deploy troopers on the territory of Ukraine and that they will protect these resources. And this is very important. You need to understand one important thing. So yes, of course, from this perspective, this is a very good idea, let's say, to see the soldiers and the troopers of the United States of America on the territory of Ukraine that will protect Ukraine, that will protect resources. And somebody can say that if US protects Ukrainian resources on the ground, that means that US protects Ukraine from the Russian Federation. But this is not something like this, because according to this agreement, the US would deploy their forces just after the end of the conflict. And this is very important. So which means that these troopers from the United States of America would be deployed on the territory of Ukraine after the end of the conflict, after the moment when Russia has no, let's say, danger to the Ukraine, is no longer dangerous to Ukraine. And from this perspective, the US troopers deployed on the territory of Ukraine would protect these resources not from Russia, but probably from Zelensky and his oligarchs and his people that obviously would try to restore control over its territory and to earn as much as possible money. So when Zelensky realized this, of course, he told people that in those agreements provided by the United States of America, there were no words about security guarantees, about the current security guarantees against Russia. Another important thing, you know that the second customer is European Union, who also is willing to purchase, to take under control Ukraine resources, because Europeans realize that if US establish complete control over Ukrainian resources, this will mean that US will sell Ukrainian resources to Europe for much bigger prices. And of course, this is not something that Europeans want to see. Now they have a lot of problems with resources, they have a lot of problems with the prices, so that's why this is not something that plays with their interests. So that's why Europeans decided to to remove US from this deal and to take Ukrainian resource under control. But European countries can't provide Zelensky money. They can't do just one thing, they can deploy troopers. And this customer, European Union, provide and promised, and probably according to different sources, is able to provide Ukrainians only 25,000 people. But 25,000 people is not enough. 25,000 people is not enough for Zelensky, because he understands if he wants to have security guarantees, if he wants to involve Europe in the conflict against Russia, he needs 120,000 people, which is much bigger number, obviously. So that's why this is not also something good, something that can fit Zelensky requirements. But anyway, this is the beginning of the trade process. This is the beginning of everything, and now most likely we're going to see some competition between the United States of America, between Europe and Zelensky about this question. But telling the truth, because of that fact that Europeans promised Zelensky to give him troopers, most likely Zelensky will accept European Union position, because we continue receiving lots of reports from Kiev during his Munich security conference, where he was talking a lot bad things about Trump, about the United States of America. He was very upset. Basically, he was insulted with the call between Putin and Trump, that Trump called him before he called him. So lots of questions, lots of things. So I'm not even sure, but maybe Zelensky is just trying to hit the price and to force the US to be probably to provide better conditions for this deal, for this fair deal. And there is another customer, the third customer, but when talking about the third customer, this is China. But when talking China, China doesn't have, when talking about China, the seller of Ukrainian rare metals is not Ukraine. The seller in this case is Russian Federation. So there is no competition for China. China most likely will take everything they need. And the most important, the further the Russians are moving in the western direction, the bigger amount of resources China can rely on. So from this perspective, European countries may start sooner or later thinking maybe it's not a very good idea to talk with Zelensky about this deal. Maybe it's better to start purchasing all these resources and getting them through Russia and China. So lots of interesting things. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. But as for now, let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the past 24 hours, we have lots of very interesting updates. First, we got several pieces of one puzzle of things that were happening there. And right before we start making the video, we got the entire picture. The Russians began their final offensive operation in this area with the purpose to defeat and to destroy, to eliminate this pocket between Dachne, Ulakly, and Constantinople. The Russians are trying to break through the Ukraine defense belt from Razdolny in the direction of N15 road. So summarizing everything, the Russians right now, this moment, these seconds, are trying to attack everything that lays along this N15 road. We are talking about several settlements, from the settlement of Dachne towards the river of Mokre Yale and towards the settlement of Kamar. The Russians are advancing in this direction, and as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we received a lot of icons, a lot of changes on the ground. First, let's talk about pocket itself. As you can see, according to several resources, the Russians improved their positions. Let's compare the map. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 14th of February, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 15th, by the end of the 15th of February, sorry. As you can see, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their positions. As for now, this information was provided us by pro-Ukrainian sources and by pro-Russian resources. The only difference is that pro-Ukrainians show this territory mainly as a contested area or as a gray zone, saying that yes, the Russians began their offensive operation, but it's still unknown whether the Russians managed to improve their positions. Maybe the Ukrainians will be able to repel this attack and to force the Russians to fall back. Anyway, the Russians began their offensive. There are very heavy clashes. Different pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to achieve significant results. For example, let's take a look at different articles that were provided by the Ukrainian side. Approximately in such direct manners, the Russian Federation's forces stormed Ukrainian positions, and on the outskirts of the settlement there were already a rush of fire, but they were depleted. According to their force, there were the clashes a lot. As you can see, the Russians are attacking Bogatyr, Constantinople, and the settlement of Ulakly. Another important statement that the Russian armored forces have launched an offensive using a large number of armored vehicles in the Kurakhov direction. It continues along the entire line of combat contact, Bogatyr, Constantinople, Ulakly. In some areas they were successful. They were able to break through to some settlements. So most likely the sources are saying about the village of Ulakly, because exactly from these areas you can see we got the biggest number of geolocations. So summarizing everything and not getting deeper into details, most likely tomorrow we will have a very significant adjustments on map, which will be confirmed by different sources, by pro-Ukrainian, by neutral, by pro-Russian, and maybe during the next 3-4 days this entire pocket will be destroyed and taken by the Russians completely. So this is the situation, and then it's very difficult and complicated to say what is going to be happen next, because the Russians can advance further in the western direction with the purpose to attack the settlements in the Zaporozhye direction. but it's not, let's say, it's not going to happen tomorrow or the day after. There are still lots of days before this, but the Russians most likely are going to begin this process right now and these days. Now let's move further. As for the Dnipro direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to answer the settlement of Preobrazhenka. As for now, this information was confirmed just by one pro-Russian resource. We haven't received anything that can confirm this from pro-Ukrainian side, so let's wait and see, but most likely this is correct information. Let's just wait for additional confirmations from different resources. As for the Pokrovsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we have just small adjustments on map on the territory of Peshchane. The Russian sources published the video how they managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces and how the Russians were bombing and attacking them. This event took place exactly in this building. Based on this video, we have adjusted this small part of Peshchane in Ukrainian favor. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in Kostiantynivka direction. As you can see, we have adjusted the map once again, and the dynamic in this area is very fast. The Russians are advancing, the Russians are moving, and basically the Russians began their offensive operation somewhere on the 10th of February of 2025. More precisely, by the 10th of February of 2025, Ukrainian sources reported that they managed to restore control over the settlement of Vadiane Druge, and based on this report published by the Ukrainian side, we have adjusted the map. This information was provided by pro-Ukrainian sources. And starting on the 10th of February, the Russians began their full-scale offensive operation, and they managed to take under control significant number of territories. First, the Russians cut the road N32 between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka. Then the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Vadiane Druge. This happened by the 30th of February of 2025. Then the next day, the Russians established complete control over the settlement by the name of Zelene Pole. And today we got report from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation that the Russians established complete control over Berezovka and that the Russians began advancing in the direction of the settlement by the name of Malinovka. So we see that the Russians are trying to improve their positions. This is something like a flower that is blooming currently. The Russians will continue this offensive operation. We see that the situation, let's say, installed completely in Russian favor. We see that the Russians see no barriers from the Ukrainian side, no resistance from the Ukrainian side, and this is basically the beginning of the general battle. We've been talking a lot during the previous days. So the main purpose of the Russians to improve their positions between the city of Pokrovsk and the city of Kostiantynivka. And when the Russians can improve their positions as they need, they will start thinking what to do next, but obviously they will try to force the Ukrainians to stretch their forces, and then the Russians will handle with every single settlement separately, because Russians will have multiple superiority in manpower and forces, and Ukrainians obviously will have a very big gap between their number of their forces and the forces of the armed force of Russian Federation. Furthermore, don't forget that while the Russians improving their positions here, there are very critical situation in the South Donetsk direction, and when the Russians finish the battle for this pocket, for this foothold, obviously they will continue moving further. Now let's discuss the situation in Toretsk, and for the first time since the for the previous several days, we got the video from the settlement of Shcherbynivka. This video was published by the Ukrainian side, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russian units in this village, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. So this video confirms that the Russians didn't have any operational pause, that the Russians were moving, and that the Russians managed to improve their positions. Let's compare the map. We have adjusted the map, some territories in the eastern part of Shcherbynivka, but mainly we adjusted the contested area. So this is the situation by the end of the 14th of February, and this is the situation by the end of the 15th of February. So the Russians continue their offensive operation, and this attack, this progress on the ground, is the puzzle, is the same part of Russian offensive from the west. So the Russians, as we understand, are trying to move along the N32 road in the direction of Kliban-Bytska Vodokhranilishe, and here we can see the same story. The Russians began advancing in the direction of same water reservoir from the north, from the southeast. So the main purpose is to connect their forces somewhere in the area of the villages of Yablunovka, Alexandra, Kalinova. If the Russians are able to do this, then this is going to be a complete disaster for the Ukrainians, not just for those Ukrainians who are currently located in this pocket. This is the beginning of the general battle. We've been talking a lot Now let's move further. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, yes, we don't have any changes. We just have several icons that were already published from the territory of Kostiantynivka, which means that the Russians are moving in this direction. But this is the third direction that the Russians should start before during the battle for Kostiantynivka. We have just discussed the battle from the south, the battle from the southwest, and obviously another direction which the Russians are going to use for offensive operation is the line between Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and Kostiantynivka. But as for now, we don't see additional progress on the ground, which means that maybe the Russians, let's say, are losing their timings in this area. Anyway, I believe that they will be able to let's say, to synchronize directions, and once again, this is the general battle. As for the Kupin's direction, during the past 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just the regular activities along the line of combat contact. The Russians were trying to attack and destroy Ukrainian logistics. The Russians were trying to destroy Ukrainian temporary deployment points, but as you can see, without any changes on the ground. The same thing came from the Suda direction, lots of icons, but mainly we are talking about aviation strikes, artillery strikes, without any changes on the ground. Maybe the weather conditions doesn't allow the Russians to advance. Maybe the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation by bringing additional forces in this area. Maybe the Russians are regrouping before further offensive operation. As for now, it's very difficult to understand. But different sources reported that there are very heavy clashes in this area, and for example, several pro-Russian resources confirmed that during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to completely clear the settlement of Fansievka, and that the Russians managed to secure the settlement of Cherkasskaya Konopelka. If this information is correct, then during the next several days, pro-Russian and both pro-Russian and Ukrainian resources should confirm Russian control over everything to the south. So we are waiting for these updates. Maybe something like this is going to happen during the next days. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their offensive operation in Sverdlikova. Also, we got report that the Russians are about to finish the settlement, and we have some changes on the ground according to neutral mappers. So we see that now the Russians, when talking about the global perspectives, are moving in the direction of Sudzha from this area, and the Russians are moving in the same direction from the southeast, trying to attack Sudzha from behind and to cut Ukrainians in this pocket and to encircle this area. So as you can see, as for now, we have two possible cauldrons along the line of combat contact. The first one in the Sudzha direction, the second one in the Kostiantynivka direction, and of course we have unstoppable Russian offensive operation in the Dnipro direction. And the most important updates we are expecting exactly from this area during the next several days. And that's it for today. Military Summary Channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.